There's a version of you that only exists when no one is watching. And then there's the version that shows up in relationships. The one who adjusts, who softens certain opinions, who stops mentioning certain things because you've noticed, even subtly, that they make the other person uncomfortable. You didn't decide to do this. You just did it. And if you're honest, you've been doing it your whole life, not just in romance. In friendships, in family, maybe even at work. There's a quiet, persistent feeling that the you inside the relationship is not quite the same as the you that exists alone. And the strangest part? You're not sure which one is real. Let's slow down and actually look at what this feels like from the inside. Because it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel like you're losing anything. It feels like you're being considerate. Like you're being flexible, mature, easy to be around. And for a while it even feels good. You pick up their music taste. You mirror their weekend rhythms. You start using their phrases. You find yourself agreeing with opinions that, a year ago, you might have pushed back on. And somewhere in the middle of all that, you wake up one day and realize you can't remember the last time you did something just because you wanted to. You've been running on preferences borrowed from someone else. This is the specific texture of it. You're in a conversation and you have a thought, a real one. Something you actually believe, and before it reaches your mouth, there's a split-second calculation. Will this land well? Will it create tension? Will they think less of me? And sometimes you say it anyway, but more often you edit it. You soften it, or you swallow it entirely. And you do this so naturally, so automatically, that you don't even register it as a choice. Over time, the effects become harder to ignore. You feel vaguely resentful, but you don't know what you're resentful about, because you can't point to the moment you gave something up. You feel emotionally exhausted after connection instead of nourished by it. You feel a strange loneliness, even when the relationship looks fine from the outside, because the person being known isn't fully you. And then when the relationship ends, or even just goes through a rough patch, you feel an identity-level disorientation. Who am I when I'm not shaped around them? Psychologists have a name for this pattern. It's called self-concept diffusion, the tendency for a person's sense of self to blur and bleed at the edges when they enter close relationships. But understanding the name doesn't explain why it happens. And the why is more important than you might expect. Because the why will tell you something about your brain, about your history, and about what this pattern was actually designed to do. Here's the thing that almost no one says out loud. This is not a character flaw. It is not weakness. It is not codependency in the clinical broken sense. It is an adaptation. An adaptation, by definition, means it worked. At some point in some environment, this behavior kept you safe. Think about it this way. Every child is born into a relationship before they are born into the world. Before language, before logic, before the self has any real structure, there is a caregiver. And the child's first psychological job is not to be themselves. It's to read the room, to detect what the caregiver needs emotionally, to adjust accordingly, to stay close, to stay safe. The child who learned to mute themselves. When their parent was stressed, that child was being intelligent. The child who shape-shifted to fit different moods. The child was surviving a complex environment. The self-erasure you carry into adulthood was, at one point, a form of very sophisticated social intelligence. Think about it this way. Every child is born into a relationship before they are born into the world. Before language, before logic, before the self has any real structure, there is a caregiver. And the child's first psychological job is not to be themselves. It's to read the room. To detect what the caregiver needs emotionally, to adjust accordingly, to stay close, to stay safe. The child who learned to mute themselves when their parent was stressed, that child was being intelligent. The child who shape-shifted to fit different moods, that child was surviving a complex environment. The self-erasure you carry into adulthood was, at one point, a form of very sophisticated social intelligence. Let's go into the brain for a moment. Because there's a specific reason this pattern becomes automatic. And once you understand it, the whole thing starts to make a different kind of sense. It begins with something called attachment theory, a framework developed by British psychologist John Bowlby, and later expanded by researchers like Mary Ainsworth. The core idea is simple. Humans are wired for connection, not as a preference. As a survival mechanism. For most of human history, being separated from your group meant death. So the brain evolved to treat social rejection with the same urgency as physical danger. The same neural circuits that fire when you're threatened fire when you feel someone pulling away. The same stress hormones. The same activation in the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center. Now, here's where it connects to your pattern. When you were young and your emotional expression was met with withdrawal, or criticism, or indifference, or conflict, your brain drew a conclusion. Not consciously, not in words. It was deeper than that. It was the brain saying, being fully yourself is not safe here. And so it built a system. A preemptive self-monitoring system designed to scan for social threat and adjust your behavior before rejection could occur. In neuroscience, this is called predictive coding, the brain's tendency to anticipate outcomes based on past experience rather than wait for new data. Your brain is not seeing your current partner or your current friend as they actually are. It is running a simulation based on old relationship data and adjusting your behavior to prevent an outcome that may have happened years ago. Here's a metaphor that might make this clearer. Imagine you're driving a car with a GPS system that was last updated 10 years ago. The roads have changed. New highways were built. Old ones were closed. But the GPS doesn't know that. So it keeps rerouting you down paths that no longer exist, or warning you about obstacles that are no longer there. Your self-monitoring system is that GPS. It was calibrated for an old landscape. And it is still routing your behavior based on terrain that may have long since changed. There's one more layer to this. Psychologists also point to something called relational self-theory, the idea that the self is not fixed. It shifts depending on who we're with. This is normal and healthy in small doses. You are naturally slightly different around your mother than around your friends. That's not inauthenticity, that's social flexibility. But for some people, the shift is not small. For some people, the relational self swallows the core self entirely. And the reason this happens is not weakness of character. It's the size of the gap between how safe a person feels expressing their true self versus how much they need the relationship to survive. When that need is high, and when early experience taught you that full self-expression risks the relationship, the math the brain runs is simple. Shrink. Adjust. Stay close. Now, knowing this doesn't automatically fix it, but it changes the entry point. Because now you're not fighting a personal failure. You're updating a system, and systems can be updated. Here are 5 principles that are grounded in how the brain actually changes. Not in motivation or willpower, but in neuroscience and behavioral psychology. Name the disappearance in real time what to do. Start noticing the exact moment you edit yourself. Not in reflection later, in the moment. The swallowed thought. The adjusted opinion. The thing you almost said. You don't have to say it yet. You just have to notice it. Why it works in the brain. Naming an experience activates the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for conscious decision-making. When you name what's happening, you interrupt the automatic loop. Neuroscientist Matthew Lieberman's research calls this affect labeling, and it has been shown to reduce the intensity of emotional reactions by pulling them from the amygdala into conscious awareness. You can't change what you can't see, but the moment you see it, you've already changed your relationship to it. Real-life example: you're at dinner with a partner. They mention a film they love. You have a completely different reaction to it, but you feel the familiar pull to agree. You notice it. You don't have to say anything yet, but you internally mark it. There it is. The edit. Noticing is the first movement of the pendulum. Cultivate a private self deliberately. What to do? Set aside time and space that belongs entirely to you. Experiences, opinions, and preferences that are not shared, not negotiated, not shaped by anyone else's presence. Why it works in the brain. Psychologist Elaine Aron's research on highly sensitive people and broader self-concept research shows that a stable sense of self requires something called self-complexity, a rich inner life with multiple, distinct facets. When all of your facets are oriented toward others, your self-concept becomes thin. It loses texture. Creating a private self gives the brain a stable reference point, something to return to even when relational pressure pulls you outward. Real-life example: you start keeping a journal that you never share. Not for therapy, not for growth content, just a place where your actual thoughts live. Or you re-engage with a creative interest you dropped somewhere in a past relationship. Not because someone encouraged you, because you want it. That private act is neurologically significant. It tells the brain, I exist outside of this relationship. Practice low-stakes disagreement. What to do? Start disagreeing in situations where the stakes are genuinely low. A different preference at a restaurant. A different opinion on a film. A mild correction when someone misremembers something. Small things. Why it works in the brain. This is behavioral exposure therapy applied to relationships. The brain's fear system operates on prediction. It predicts that self-expression will lead to rejection. The only way to update that prediction is to give it new data. Every small moment of genuine self-expression that is met with anything other than catastrophe is a data point that says, the old model was wrong. Over time, the brain recalibrates. Not because you convinced it with logic, but because experience overwrote the old pattern. Real-life example: your friend suggests a restaurant. You genuinely don't want that food. Instead of saying, yeah, fine, you say, I'm not really feeling that. Can we do somewhere else? They say okay, nothing happens. No rejection, no conflict. Just two people navigating a preference. And your brain logs that. Quietly, slowly, cumulatively. Separate adaptation from authenticity. What to do. Learn to tell the difference between genuine growth within a relationship and self-erasure disguised as growth. Ask yourself this specific question. Am I changing because this genuinely resonates with me, or because I'm afraid of what happens if I don't? Why it works in the brain. Self-determination theory, developed by Deci and Ryan, distinguishes between two types of behavioral motivation. Intrinsic, driven by genuine interest or values. Extrinsic, driven by fear of outcome, approval, or punishment. When change is intrinsic, it builds identity. When it's extrinsic, it erodes it. Your brain can feel the difference. It registers as either expansion or compression. Expansion feels like curiosity, aliveness, even gentle discomfort. Compression feels like smallness, dullness, low-grade dread. You felt both. You know the difference. Real-life example. Your partner loves hiking. You never did before. You try it and something genuinely opens up. That's real. Keep it. But if you spent 2 years attending events you hate and slowly stopped mentioning the things you love, that's not adaptation. That's compression. And you don't have to perform gratitude for it. Let yourself be seen incrementally what to do. Reintroduce yourself, not all at once, but in small, deliberate doses. Share a real opinion. Mention something you genuinely care about. Bring something back that you let quietly disappear. Why it works in the brain. Brené Brown's research on vulnerability aligns with broader attachment theory here. Trust is not built by grand gestures. It is built by small, repeated moments of showing up and being received. And the same is true in reverse. You relearn to trust yourself through small, repeated moments of self-expression that don't end in rejection. The brain needs evidence, not arguments, not affirmations. Evidence. Real-life example. You stop talking about a particular interest, maybe philosophy or a certain kind of music or something spiritual, because a past partner wasn't interested. You bring it up once in a new relationship. Just once. Lightly. Not as a test. As an offering of who you are. And if they engage even imperfectly, even briefly, you log that as safe. And you take up a little more space. Here's the mental model to hold on to. Think of your sense of self as a signal, a radio signal. It exists whether anyone is listening or not. It has its own frequency, its own particular sound. When you enter a relationship, the natural impulse is to tune your frequency toward the other person, to harmonize, to synchronize, to reduce friction. And some of that is beautiful. That's what connection feels like. But there's a difference between two signals in conversation and one signal overriding the other entirely. When you lose yourself in relationships, you don't go quiet. You just stop broadcasting on your own frequency. You start relaying theirs. And the tragedy is not that you disappear. The tragedy is that no one, not even you, gets to hear what your signal actually sounds like. The work is not to become less loving. Not to become rigid or guarded or self-centered. The work is to keep the signal alive even while in proximity to someone else's. To let your frequency coexist with theirs. To stay tuned to yourself even while being genuinely close to another person. That's not a relationship limitation. That's what real intimacy actually requires. Because intimacy is not the merging of two selves. It is two distinct people choosing to be close while remaining whole. You've been trying to be lovable for a long time. Not in a desperate way, in a quiet, exhausting, below-the-surface way. Adjusting before you even realize you're adjusting. Giving before you're asked. Disappearing so gradually that no one notices, including you. And somewhere in that effort, the assumption crept in that the real you, unedited, unexplained, unpolished, might not be enough. That the love would stop if you stopped performing for it. But here is what the psychology actually says. The relationships that last are not built on the version of you that adjusts endlessly. They're built on contact. Real contact. The kind that can only happen when two actual people are present. You can't have real contact with a mirror. And when you erase yourself to keep someone close, you don't give them you. You give them a reflection of themselves. And people, even people who seem to want agreement, are often quietly searching for something real to push against. Something solid. Someone who is there. The part of you that you've been editing out, that's not the problem. That might be the most interesting thing about you. The opinion you swallowed. The interest you quietly abandoned. The thing you stopped mentioning because it didn't seem to fit. That's not too much. It's what's been missing. You don't have to become someone new. You just have to stop disappearing. Slowly, imperfectly, without announcing it. Start taking up the space you were always supposed to occupy, not because you've finally earned it, but because it was always yours.